Oh, it's live. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to Venture with Grace. I'm so sorry. Literally, I was just every single day I do this, but like I'm like whenever it's like actually live, I'm still having like a major like moment
Well,
slash heart
thank you.
attack.
Thank you for having me, Grace. I appreciate that.
I feel like the audience probably don't need an introduction of you since like I feel like, who doesn't knows you? Like I feel like you're like the most iconic person in the early stage community. So I want to maybe start with like, since like if the audience who is curious about your background, so I would say you started your career as an engineer and you work at Google and the short version is like you started a startup and then you started like talking about the startup and later on you are like a partner at 500 startup or like 500 global now. And so the TLDR is like, I feel like most of the audience probably know you from social media. So like, I feel like you guys built a really iconic presence on Twitter and Hustle Funds everywhere, the Angel Squad, as well as like, just like, I feel like you guys does such an amazing job in the social media space. So like I'm sure like everybody knows you, but when I maybe we could talk about like, what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that you kind of took to start Hustle Fun?
Oh, wow. Well, first off, thank you for that. You flatter me too much. I don't think a lot of people know us. That's something we try to work on. And but I think to get to your question of like, I never actually thought I would be an investor. That was just not something that was ever on my mind. Certainly, as you kind of alluded to, I studied engineering in college, and so and I have immigrant parents. So, I always thought, oh, engineering, and that's what I'll do. I think a lot of engineers sometimes think, oh, I'll go into product. And some people think, oh, I'll start a company. But nobody ever really thinks, oh, I'll go into VC, at least not back then. Now VC is a much more well known industry. But back then, I would say it was very much a small cottage industry and no one knew anything about it. And also, a lot of people say that investing in startups is risky, which it is. But I think there's much more of a science now to it than back then. And so, anyway, long story short, I very much came into Hustle Fund from the perspective of an entrepreneur of, after I sold my last company, which admittedly wasn't that big of an exit, I wanted to really shoot for the moon and like many founders hope to build a big company someday. But the thing that I also knew in coming into Hustle Fund was I really wanted it to be my life's work. I think one of the things that I learned along the way that I didn't realize as a younger me was that everything takes time. Compounding takes time. And in the beginning, it's kind of slow, but then once you get something going, you don't want to let it go. And I think most startups actually sell too early. Your ideal scenario is that actually you build a company for 20, 30, 40 years, not 5 to 10 or 10 to 20. I have a company that started right out of our dorm room. So, about 20 years ago. And it's like they totally bootstrapped it. And in the beginning, it did not seem like it was going anywhere for the first 10 years. But now, they do 8 figures a year of revenue, very profitable, haven't raised any money. And it's like just starting right in year 20. So I think this is my biggest learning is that people are so impatient and want to move on with their life. But what if you could work on the thing that's your life's work? You would want to do it whether you got paid or not. And also, you would allow yourself to compound it for 30, 40 years. So that was the mindset that I was in when I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And that is what led me to Hustle Fund because after trying customer development in a number of areas, I realized actually I don't care about most problems. The problem that I cared the most about was how can I help more founders? And specifically, I realized they need capital, knowledge, and networks. And that's what we set out to do with Hustle Fund. Like essentially try to help as many founders as we can with capital, knowledge, and networks. Whether or not we're able to invest in them is another story, but can we help you along your journey?
Totally. I feel like I really like the name Hustle Fun. Like you said, like people need to be like really patient and then like your effort will compound over time. And like it's actually like I was like before when I was listening to your talk with like the Harlem Capital podcast, and then basically you were seeing like, for Twitter to like build a following, you would kind of like the frequency and like the consistency is like a really big thing for compounding on Twitter. And I feel like it's kind of like the same with like hustle fund or like helping founders slash building a fund. It's probably also just like frequency and consistency as well. I wonder, so like when you were thinking about if you're starting, like because hustle fund right now, I feel like you guys already built like a reputation in the industry, and then there's a lot of things that you guys are doing. So for example, I would see it on the event page. You guys have a lot of like these events, and then there's like the angel squad, like a lot of my friends are a part of, and then there is also just like you guys like have so much presence and everywhere, and then you guys like really have. I listen to like Eric was previously on the show, and then he basically also talked about like in the early days, you would ask your dentist to like put money into hustle fund. Like maybe we could start with like, what were the like let's say like day one when you first started trying to start like hustle fund, what was it like? And then do you feel like a lot of the 500 global thing that like really impacted how you invest for hustle funds? This is like a kind of like uh um I wouldn't call it spray and pray, but like, early stage is all about numbers anyway. So like maybe we could talk about like, what was a day one kind of look like for Hustle Fund, and what were some like core strategies that you feel like you've done right versus like what are something that you would do differently today?
Yeah, great questions. So we'll start with your first one, which is what did day one look like? I mean, I think, day one of any new initiative, whether it's a VC firm or a startup, looks really scrappy and not at all polished. So day one for Hustle Fund was Eric and I had said, all right, this is what we're going to do. Now what? Like, well, I guess we have to go and raise some money because you're not a VC fund if you don't have any money.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people who start funds think, oh, let's go and approach all the big institutionals because they write the big checks. And that's kind of the quickest way to being able to get to a big fund. The reality is, unless you have amazing track record and you were at Sequoia or something like that, even if you were at another VC firm, most institutionals won't look at you for fund one. They may meet with you, but they're not thinking about investing in you for fund one. And so we figured this out relatively quickly. And we just started raising any checks that we could from essentially friends and family. And those checks even were as small as $5,000 for a VC fund in our fund one. I think that it's so interesting. Recently, I saw ENIAC VC firm post what their fund would look like, and it was less than $2 million. So I think a lot of people don't realize, like even these iconic VC firms, they all started small and they all started simple. And so you don't need to go crazy in trying to raise $100,000 checks even from people. Just like get some money in the door and you're in business. And so that's what we did, like just knocking on all doors. You mentioned dentists. I mean, I think everybody's got some level of network, even if you feel like you're not a network person. You probably have a dentist. You probably have like a lawyer who's working on your stuff. You probably have a doctor. Maybe you don't see that doctor very often. This is a good time to go get a checkup. You probably I pitched my eye doctor 3 times across 3 funds, and he's retired now. So I think I'm done pitching him. But you have these people you run into, or even when you go to a party, you meet engineers, you meet designers, you meet marketers. Like all of these people are professional people who could probably put 5 to 10K into your fund if they really wanted to.
100%. But like, how would you walk into that conversation? Let's say if I met you at a party and I start pitching you about my, imaginary fund, and then like, what would our like conversation look like? Is that just like, oh, by the way, the weather is nice, like you must be my fun, and then show them like a pitch deck right away, or
Uh,
like, what's the vibe there?
so that's probably the bigger question. Most people don't pitch all these people they run into every day because they're not sure how to lead into it. So I'll tell everybody here how I lead into it.
Oh, this
Which
will be like 10 different clips, but anyway, please go.
so what I do is, you go to, let's say, a party or something and you meet someone and they say, hi, I'm so and so. Hi, I'm so and so. And then there's like a natural question of, how have you been? Or what are you up to? Or what do you do? Any of those questions, doesn't matter. That's your lead in to pitch. You have a very small window. And on any of those questions where they're asking about you, that's your lead in to pitch. But you have to pitch quickly, not a 30-second pitch. It's like a 5 to 10-second pitch. And so let's say I meet you, Grace, at a party, and you're like, I'm Grace, I'm Elizabeth. And then you say, oh, how are you? What are you up to? And then that's when I say, oh, I just started a new VC fund called Hustle Fund. It's been super fun, some one-liner about it, and we're raising. So if you want to invest, would love to chat with you. That's it. It's very fast, like 2 to 3 lines, no more than that, right? You shouldn't be monologuing. And it's just, and you kind of say it with like a half smile, half laugh, because you are half joking. Like, obviously, if you do this with everybody, like, most people are going to say, oh, ha ha, right? Like, I just met you. But there are people, actually, I have run into lots of people who have told me, oh, that sounds so interesting. I want to hear more, or let's grab coffee to chat more about it. And even if they're not interested from an LP perspective, they may say, oh, I have a friend or whatever. So you never know what you're going to get. For most people, it goes nowhere. It's a half joke. You move on, and that's fine. You don't push. But if someone is interested on some level, whether it's they're personally interested in investing, or they may actually want to pitch you on something, or they may have a friend or something, you'll hear about it. That's the moment you'll hear about it. And then you take the conversation to some other time and schedule time to actually sit down for 20 to 60 minutes to do the pitch. But you don't do the pitch right then and there. It's just a way to get attention.
Totally. I already wrote down 3 questions though. Like, by the way, hi Ariel, like wanted to say to the audience. Anyway, so I feel like first of all, like thank you for the transparency, and like you're doing amazing things for the community, just because I feel like, nobody know how to actually pitch. But so there's like 3 questions. Like, one is like, what was the conversion like? So if I just pitch someone at like a random party, and then which party would you go to pitch? Because like, obviously, like I feel like the listeners maybe like will be going to like a tech event or like a Luma or whatever, like, and then if it's like at these like random crapshoot event, like how would you really go about this strategy? Like, I mean, like, would you just pitch anyone? And then the other part is like, what's the conversion rate of the pitch? Like, would it be like I pitched like 2K people and then there's like 1 conversion, or would it be like actually I pitched 100 people, then 10 people took the meeting, 5 people convert?
Yeah, great questions. So the answer is yes. It doesn't have to even be a party, right? It could be anybody you run into. This is why I mentioned that I pitched my eye doctor like 3 times, right? This is the same conversation that I have. You go into your eye appointment, and then of course they're going to ask you about you, because they're trying to make their patients feel good, right? So they say, oh, it's been a while since we've seen you and gotten your eye checked or whatever it is. And how have you been? Like, that's your cue. And so, and you have their captive attention there, right? You're in your appointment, so they can't leave. So it's not just parties; it's really anywhere. I think you first kind of try to qualify. Do you think that this person may be able to? But a lot of people, if they have a professional job of some sort, could potentially invest. And this applies not just to funds, but also to startups. If you have a startup to pitch, you can use this strategy as well. If you have a nonprofit to pitch, you can pitch anything. Like, this is your cue to pitch anything you want. And of course, I think then to your question of like, how well does this work? Well, if you do this all the time, it actually doesn't really feel like heavy lift. It feels awkward when you're first doing this, but keep doing this. So I don't actually have numbers. I'm sure the conversion is super low, but I have gotten, I don't know, probably 10 to 20 leads across 3 funds from this, but I've also probably done this with, hundreds upon people.
I love that. What about they reverse pitch you? So like sometimes you identify them as an LP and then they pitch you back on something they're building.
That happens too. Sometimes I end up getting into a meeting with someone, and then they tell me all about how they are raising a fund or raising something. And so sometimes that happens. So these things don't always go anywhere, but I think the key, whether you're running a startup or a fund, is you don't want to run out of leads. If you are oversubscribed, then you can be picky, and that's a great problem to have. But in general, you don't want to run out of leads. And so this is why you have to keep on generating new leads beyond your immediate circles. And so when people say, oh, I don't have network, I actually don't believe you need network. You just need to keep generating more leads. It's obviously harder when you don't have network, and you have to generate all your leads, but I think this is actually how it's done. Actually, my friend Matt Conwell has pretty much generated all of his leads for Fund One in a somewhat similar manner. He did all of his online, primarily through Twitter, but this is how you do it.
Yeah, I think and during the pandemic I had like a quick chat with him too. So I think he was talking about like, if someone's following him on Twitter and then he would like DM them or something.
Yeah.
And then he said this publicly, obviously, like, so I'm not giving out any information that's like not there. But I wonder, so like, for the social media strategy, so like obviously in the real life strategy, that's like a way to go. And I have like so many questions on like the fund one because I know you guys are already in the later funds, bigger size and everything. But when you first started, like would you say like I guess like how long does it take to close a fund if you're trying to raise, let's call it like um, you know, single digits million fund. And then like, so should it be like a year and then you just pitch everyone, hey, I'm about to have a fund? Or is it like 506C or otherwise it's illegal? Or like, do you just like set up everything on AngelList? Like, I guess like what's the logistical look like? So another fear is like, okay, so after you pitch someone and they're like, yeah, I'm interested, coming down for XYZ amount. And do they just like leave? And then like, do you, when you follow up with them, they never reply again? What would you do with that kind of situation versus like, are they actually interested? Like, who are the actually interested people? And I guess like how frequently do you really tell people that like, yes, I'm raising this fund, or do you tell people that like I'm thinking about it, and then when you have enough interest and then you're saying yes, I'm raising the fund? I guess like what was like the first fund kind of like vibe look like? I asked the same thing to Eric. Obviously, I feel like each co-founder have like a different story, but
Yeah. Okay. So there are a lot of questions to unpack here. The first is like logistically, how do you raise a fund? And that's a whole session in itself. But I think there are many different types of funds that you can raise. You had alluded to essentially crowdfunding, where you can be very public and announce all over social media that you're raising a fund. Versus, we never did that, but you are allowed to privately talk with people, whether it's at parties or at meetings or in your dentist appointment or whatever it is. You can privately pitch people. So that's one way to raise a fund, public versus private. The other is the kind of fund, accredited investor or qualified purchaser. And we don't need to dive into that, but like the kind of investor you approach. You can also even signal to raise a non-accredited fund as well. We've always had accredited funds that we've raised for our past 3 funds. So there are different choices, and certainly your counsel can help advise on what type of fund would be good for you to raise. And then platforms wise, there are many different choices. Of course, the traditional is bread and butter, going with a lawyer, but nowadays there are a lot of platforms that have come about. You had mentioned AngelList. We are also investors in a company called Sidecar that spins up vehicles, and there are plenty of others. So there are platforms you can use. So there are many different choices you can make. And I think that that's a much longer session that I won't go into, but we had a pretty bread and butter accredited investor fund that gave us 99 investor slots, which meant we could have a maximum of 99 investors. And that's always honestly been the challenge for us, not lack of interest, but rather enough investor slots to be able to raise the amount that we want. Because when you think about it, if you want to raise a $50 million fund and you only have 99 investor slots, it means your average slot has to be at least a $500,000 investment, which is very hard for many individuals to do. But if you could have, 10 individuals put in like 50K, then that would be fine. And we've had a lot of individuals wanting to put in much smaller amounts. So anyway, that's on the fund structure side. On the timeline side, it took us 9 months to raise our fund 1. Actually, I think all of our funds took approximately 9 months. Our fund 3 was a little bit shorter than that. I do think that people need to be patient and realize that even if they've had experience in raising money for a startup, raising money for a fund just takes a lot longer because you are raising more money. And in the beginning, you're largely raising money from individuals, much like how a startup might raise money from angel investors. In fact, they're often the same people. So So it will just take longer by definition. And it took us 700 meetings across the 9 months to raise our fund. And then lastly, you know, like, how did we position this? Well, we knew we were going to raise a fund. So we just told everyone we're raising. I think you want to be committed, whether you're raising money for a fund or a startup. Like, you should go in with the attitude of, this is what I'm doing, because you need to inspire confidence with your investors. If you say, well, I might do this, or I'm thinking about it, then no one's going to invest.
Totally. That's really helpful. By the way, hi Spencer. Like, does anyone else have bandwidth issues? I think we're fine. But anyway, let us know if you're also listening. Anyway, so I think that's really good strategy to, have a timeline. So for example, call it 9 months or whatever, like, and then really being committed. I wonder when it comes to, like, I think Eric talked about, like, you guys would like throw parties or I guess like doing some sort of events to get like the LPs, and maybe at the beginning you guys also like warehouse like some really big deals from your personal angel network. But how do you think about in terms of like building track record? Because like when you talk to like the experienced investors or like experienced LPs, they're like, oh, actually, what's your track record? And then I feel like nowadays, like when people start their fund one, it's because of like they don't have a track record, or like they don't have like a major amount of, like, they haven't invested in like 500 deals or something in the past, but maybe they have like one or two investment, or like maybe let's say call it like they have like 5 investment or something, but none of them have been like a breakout success yet because it's like very early stage and stuff like that. So how do you think about like portfolio construction at the very, very beginning, or how do you think about like what kind of like track record you have to enter the game?
You don't need any. I would
I love
actually
that.
argue that on fund one, even if you have a track record, that will not help you. Unless you're coming from like a Sequoia and have a track record, then maybe. But I know so many fund managers who on their fund one really struggled, even though they had amazing track records before. And the reason for that is it's very easy for investors to say, well, you have this great track record from before because you were with a different brand of VC. And it is that brand, that other brand, that brought your track record. Now you have a new brand that nobody knows anything about. So how are you going to get deal flow? So that's a very common piece of pushback. Another common piece of pushback is if you were a successful angel investor before, then the pushback is, well, you were working at Stripe. So of course everybody wanted to pitch you, but now you're not. So that past track record doesn't apply here. So track record actually has nothing to do with it for fund one. I think once you actually have results, then track record is important, but that will not happen for funds 1, 2, 3, or 4. Just because you don't have any liquid track record until fund 5. And so you're always, what you're doing then is you're selling the dream. And specifically, what are you doing? You're talking about your go-to-market. So this is the thing that I think most emerging fund managers don't understand is, we as VCs ask all of our founders, what's your go-to-market strategy? And how are you doing go-to-market? And that kind of thing. And no VC thinks about it for himself or herself. But every VC needs a go-to-market strategy. Like, how are you going to differentiate from all the other VCs? Like, arguably, actually, differentiation is a much bigger problem for VCs than it is startups. Capital is a commodity. My money's as good as anybody else's money. So why should people take my money over someone else's money? So that's something you have to explain. And a lot of people try to explain it like, oh, well, we only focus on fintech, or we only focus on B2B SaaS, or we invest in women. None of that is a good enough differentiator. I can tell you in all of those categories, there are like 100 funds I've met who do those things, right? So what is your true differentiator? And that's hard. That's really, really hard. I think the best example of differentiators in this space is where you've built brand. And that's partly why we try to build our brand at Hustle Fund. People like Harry Stebbings, like 20-Minute VC, right? He has this huge network. People want to be part of the network because they want him to do a podcast about them. Jason Lumpkin with SaaStr. He has a huge SaaStr network. People want to be in that network because they want him to promote their product. So typically founders gravitate towards these brands that can help them out. And that's what you need to build. Now, obviously the problem is, as an emerging fund manager, you have no brand by definition. You're just starting out. And so you have to basically pitch a story of how you are going to build a brand very quickly in the next couple of years. And And that, I think, is a thing that most fund managers do not understand. Like, how do you explain that go-to-market strategy?
I completely agree with you, and I feel like the go-to-market strategy is like a new way to look at it. But like, I feel like this is like definitely making a lot of sense for the audience, and like I wonder when it comes to building a brand, and there is like the strategy such as like posting a lot and like posting frequently. Is there anything else to it? Like, and then when it comes to like generating deals, I feel like the most like pushback I've heard is like, let's say you're a generalist, and then like if you're like you're a small fund or like small niche fund, or like just like a small fund in general, the GPs want to invest in like the GPS LP. So basically, let's say like the LPs want to invest in like niche subject stuff. So for example, you only invest in infrastructure, B2B SaaS, data, whatever. So like, or fintech, or like basically you pick a niche and then really become the thought leader of that niche. But I feel like for a pre-seed seed fund, which is like the one that a regular person probably more likely to raise than like a later stage fund, um, you kind of want it to be like more towards generalists, and then kind of like it's a numbers game after all. How do you think about going into a niche or not? Or like, if you're a generalist, how do you define like brand building?
I think it's the same whether you're a specialist or a generalist. You have to build a brand where founders want to pick you.
Mhm.
And so if you are a generalist, what are the reasons for picking you? So a good example of a generalist brand that does well is Y Combinator. Like, people pick them. And why do they pick them? They pick them because of the valuation bump at demo day. They pick them because of the mentorship. They pick them because of the network to sell to other YC companies.
Mhm.
That's a big one, actually, that many people gravitate towards. So things like that. So if you're a generalist, are there things you can build? If you're a generalist with a large portfolio, there are probably things you can build around community building. So that way founders can build a great network with other founders, maybe even sell to other founders or partner with other founders in your portfolio. Maybe it's you have large distribution across your newsletter or your social media and they want to get access to that. Whatever it is, like that's probably the generalist brand building exercise. For specialists, it's probably something along the lines of expertise and network. So if you're focused on, let's say, pre-seed fintech, like who is in your network? Can you get companies access to this person or that person around regulation or regulatory? Maybe you have someone very specific around crowdfunding types of things. Like there was a time period where everyone was tokenizing like everything. So, like if you are a specialist, what are the networks and knowledge that you're building in that specialist area that people would want to gravitate to you for? So it's the same strategy regardless of whether you're a generalist or specialist. You have to build out essentially that network and knowledge that you want to be known for.
Mm. I want to say I feel like a hustle fund has been like everywhere, and then like as a consistent brand from the personal brand, like the voice of like the font, as well as like there's like so many sessions that you guys have done. Like I listened to the one with Sophia Maruso while I was like researching her. She was a past guest on the show, and then I was like researching her, and then I listened to like her episode of like how she fundraised. I feel like you guys put out a lot of like really useful content on the internet. How do you think about brand building? Like, what's like the biggest ROI there? Just because like there is also, I know you guys do these like in-person event, but I feel like in person, like the actual in-person thing, maybe it's just like 100 people, but online, obviously people around the globe can, hear from you from Twitter or everything else. How do you think about like, which one to double down on? And then like, what does each um like brand pieces kind of like serve for maybe deal function, like deal funnel, or like go to market to LPs, or like how do you think about like the content to result kind of conversion, or like kind of like the ratio there?
Yeah, I think it's like building a startup. There are a lot of different channels you could be using,
Mhm.
and certain ones will be more successful for your company partly because you are better at utilizing certain channels than others. So I'll give you an example of a few channels we've tried that haven't worked for us, but certainly have worked for other people. We're not good at TikTok. We're not good at podcasting. These are things we've tried, but podcasting, there are tons of VCs in this space who have done podcasting well, right? And so that's an example of podcasting can certainly work, but it has to work well for you. So I think that trying a bunch of things is the way to go, and then trying to figure out which ones are the ones you're good at that you can see yourself repeating in a scalable way, like our important criteria, and then also where you're getting uptick as well. So it's a combination of your own operational efficiency around it, as well as where are you seeing good engagement. For us, we ended up doubling down on Twitter, writing, like actually blog writing and newsletter writing, and then events. We do a little bit of online events, and those, to your point, certainly can generate more leads, so to speak. We will often get about 1,000 people signing up for those versus our in-person, we can only accommodate maybe 100 or 200. But what we have found through this combination is our writing actually is able to be everlasting, and it's easier for people to digest, and it's something that we are good at producing very quickly through our processes. So that kind of scratches that itch of reaching lots of people, getting in front of lots of people globally. But then the in-person for us, even though it doesn't have that big of a reach, for people who do come, you really do get to feel like, what is it like to be in the Hustle Fund community? And that is really hard to replicate online. So it is important for us to do this as well. We've met a lot of our portfolio founders through in-person events, or they have referred their friends because they had a great time at our events. And our LPs actually show up in any and all of these channels. We've had a number of LPs come inbound now from having read our philosophy and how we invest online. And a number of LPs come in because they had a great time at one of our events as well. So that's our permutation, but there are plenty of ways to do your customer acquisition, if you will, as a fund.
Totally. I have a question actually coming in from Instagram. So someone asked, like, how much does a lawyer cost to like create a fund?
Oh gosh, lawyers are
All right,
so.
this is so like we have the most random question ever. I love the audience. It's always like really surprising.
It is really expensive. And Instagram is a channel we haven't really tried yet. But
Hey.
so a lawyer can cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like if you go with sort of a bread and butter fund created by a lawyer. But this is actually what has driven a lot of the platforms that I had mentioned earlier, like a sidecar or an angel list, in that, it comes with all the legal docs. They spin up the funds for you, etc. And those are a lot cheaper. So it really does range a lot.
Okay, so I guess like his question is probably just towards like literally like if you're setting up a fund, like how much does it cost roughly? I feel like that's a essential question because people picture lawyer would be like just expensive, but yeah, would you say it's like 100K like to ensemble the fund, or like would it be like more?
Yeah, it could be 100K or more. But one of the things I would say is that it also really depends on the situation. So, for example, when we got started, actually, a lot of these platforms were a lot newer or didn't exist. So, we went with a lawyer, and we went with a marquee lawyer. So, they were quite expensive. But what we did was we brokered a deal with them to defer payment. So, we didn't actually have to pay until we got to our first close and actually had money to pay with. And so, lawyers do this deal with startups as well, deferred payment. In essence, what you are pitching them on is they believe you have the ability to raise your fund or raise money for your startup, because they're not going to get paid until you get paid. And so that's what they have to believe. And so they will do this deal with people they think can raise. And so, you just go in and negotiate that deal.
Do like so for example, if you like literally fail at raising the first fund, like do you still pay by deferred?
No.
Do you still like own them? Okay, got it.
So they don't do this deal with everybody, as you can
Of
imagine. Like, they
course,
want to
yeah,
know
yeah.
you're serious about it. you're actually going to try hard, and they believe you actually have a chance.
Do you feel like you would get LPs from the lawyer side too, or like does it like not very
I
often?
have heard of other fund managers being able to. Certainly, whoever's your lawyer has the ability to invest. And I have heard that as well. And I do know that law firms sometimes, as a firm, invest in funds, but we have not had that happen to us. We did try to pitch our lawyer lightly, but they kind of laughed it off.
Yeah. Is there any events that you felt like very effectively to meet the LPs? Obviously, there's like, so many conferences, literally like it's GP meeting the LPs. But is it like really successful when everybody is there? I feel like, wouldn't name names, but some of the event would be like LP pitching LPs because every GP is also an LP now. So
Yeah.
how do you think about like, who is the right person to pitch at some of the events, or like is there any events that you feel like actually is successful, or like maybe is that just like personal branding exercise or like to go to the events? But I wonder like what is I guess the ideal version of the events kind of like look like to actually successfully fundraise.
Yeah. Well, I think there's no right formula in where to pitch an LP. And actually, I think, pitching your dentist outside of an outside of an LP event in many ways is a lot easier because your dentist is not getting 50 other funds pitching him or her.
Yeah,
Um,
not
maybe
after this
well, maybe
podcast.
now that we're talking about it, every dentist is going to get pitched. But
Exactly.
but the thing is, by definition, at these events, everybody is pitching, and it can be very overwhelming, I think, for LPs because it's like, oh gosh, I go to the event and like there are 100 people pitching me, and they all sound the same, and I don't want to do an investment anymore. I mean, this is often how VCs feel when they go to founder events and everybody comes up and starts pitching. It's like you can't tell anybody apart when you have 100 pitches. So I actually think in general, most events are not very effective because of that. Like it is definitionally an event for people to go and pitch, and therefore your chances of being successful are a lot less because now you're one of 100 people pitching versus when you're going to your dentist, you are one of one pitches, and maybe you're still not going to successfully close that person, but that person doesn't have to think through the 50 other patients who pitched. So it is a balance because on one hand, you're getting in front of the right audience, but on the other hand, you're getting in front of them in a venue that is all about pitching, and it's harder to stand out. So I would say sort of as a shout out for a couple of events, like, we've met amazing people at Upfront Summit and also Raise as a couple of places. But, again, like at both of those places, there are a lot of people pitching constantly. Your best bet is to kind of just spend the time building rapport and then take your pitch offline and like have people like you so that they want to take the pitch offline. I mean, you talked about ghosting, and ghosting definitely happens, but if you build enough rapport, like people will want to chat with you later. So that's how I would spend my time at these events, not focused on trying to close anybody.
How do you think about like having enough pipeline, like, or how do you track the pipeline? So let's say you have pitched 30 people. What kind of feedback you have to get to be like, oh, this is a right signal of like I actually can pull it off?
I think certainly with 30 people, if you're on the right track because you'll start to hear questions. And if you hear a couple of the same question over and over, you have not addressed that well. And I say that for both startups and funds.
What if people just don't reject you? Everything is a yes and good, but like, you also don't get funding.
So there are kind of two reasons for that happening. One is you don't do enough follow-up or the person totally ghosts. And by not enough follow-up, I'll give you a sense of what I mean. Like in our fund one, my business partner Eric, whom you spoke with before, he followed up with one of our LPs 13 times. So most people don't follow up 13 times. And I'm not suggesting you necessarily need to, but when people say, oh yeah, this person fell off the face of the planet, was it after 5 times of following up, or was it after 10, or was it after 15? Like, there's no right number, but the more times you follow up, the higher your chances of getting through. And I think if you flip the situation around, everyone is so busy. They may not mean to ghost you. Some people do, but they may not mean to ghost you. They just may think, okay, I'll save this email for later. I'll get back to them later. But then weeks pass. Like, I don't know if this has happened to anybody, but sometimes, especially for emails where I want to have a very thoughtful response, and especially where I'm actually thinking about something. It doesn't even have to be a pitch, but like, I want to get back to that person, and then just time flies. So that happens. And I would give people the benefit of the doubt, but like, it means you just need to keep on following up to stay top of mind and move your email back to the top of the inbox. And it does work. Like, we often have to follow up with people who end up becoming LPs several times. Just people are busy.
I think that's like a really good benchmark to follow up, maybe call it like 10 times or like at least like 5 times or something, I guess. Sometimes I just feel like, oh, wouldn't people be like very annoyed when they see like this same person in my inbox for like 16 times? But I don't know.
They might be, but I think the likelihood is they haven't seen your email.
Okay.
Because I don't know. I'll give you a day in the life of my email. I get 200 to 300 emails every day. And I do try to go through them every day and clean it out. If you don't, though, and I know plenty of people who also are in the same boat but don't, like, that just builds up. You now have thousands of emails in your inbox. Like, you can't find anything.
Yeah, for sure. How do you think about the I guess like when building a track record or like I guess like how do you think about like spending your time would at the beginning of your first round like you would spend most of the time to just like LP chasing or like would you say and then how many are would you say it's like inbound versus outbound? Like inbound meaning it doesn't mean like they inbound you be like, hey, like can I invest in Hustle Founder, but it's more of like they have heard of you, they have seen some of your content, they have recognition of your brand versus like the people who are like, oh, I completely don't know you before this pitch.
Yeah. So actually, now we go to more events because of that brand building. Like, I think it's easier to go to events when people have heard your brand, so then they do want to meet with you at the events. I think it is much harder on a fund one. And I think in general, going to events on a fund one is a waste of time because, again, you're in a situation where there are hundreds of people pitching and many of those other people already have brands and you have no brand. And now you're trying to stand out amongst 100 other GPs. Like, it's just really hard. It's a much easier situation if you're like one-on-one with somebody and sticking out that way on a fund one. So I think it really depends where in the life cycle you are as a fund manager, and same with a startup, right? If you are a pre-seed startup, no one has ever heard of you, going to an event for pitching is hard. And, but if there are a lot of if you already have some level of brand, like even if you're a seed company at this point, you have some level of followers, some people have used your product, then it does get easier. So I think that your strategy may change over time as you build your brand. And then now to your point, like we actually do get inbound emails from potential LPs because they've read a lot of our stuff. And so they know how we invest and how we think about investing, et cetera. In our fund one, we had to pretty much generate all of our leads. And we started essentially, if you think of it like an onion, you start with friends or people in your network. And then you ask every person like, hey, do you know one person who may be interested? And then you can expand that layer. So just that one question and ask for just one intro. Don't ask for like, hey, do you know anybody? Do you know one person? Because it's a lot easier for people to concretely think of one name than it is to think, I don't know who. So make the ask easy, and then you can expand your network that way. The other thing in generating leads on our fund one, we went to our founders. Surprisingly, actually, and it makes sense, but a number of founders I had back previously at 500 Global, they all had investors if they had raised money. And some of those investors were also LPs, they were family offices, et cetera. And so that's how we were able to get into other networks through our founders. And that's a group of people most people don't think about, because most people think, oh, well, founders are pitching people for money, but founders actually know a lot of funders.
That's true. Wait, so you asked the founder to introduce to their investors? Is it like
Yeah,
is
I
there
still
like
do that. I still do that. That's like a great strategy. I just met with an angel investor yesterday who is a founder's angel investor.
Wow. Oh my God. So, but like, would that be like, I mean, how do you, so like, do you have to, so I guess you have to invest in them and then they introduce you to that person. And like, how do you feel like how do you make the founder feel like comfortable to intro?
Well, so first of all, I'm only making that ask of founders I have backed. So
Right. Okay.
hopefully
Yeah.
they already know me and they like me
Mhm.
from our working relationship. Because otherwise, I think that'd be a very hard ask to just go up to any random founder. But yeah, that's actually a good, I guess, source of LPs for us. Like
Mhm.
like if I think if you have worked with a lot of founders, you've invested in founders before and they like you, like people are more than willing to open up their network and introduce you to their funders. And I think part of it also is just empathy, in that
Mhm.
even though a lot of people think that VCs and founders are opposite, VCs and founders actually have very similar jobs. Like they have to
Mhm.
both raise money. And so if you are a founder, you understand how hard it is to raise money. And so if you see your favorite VC or a VC you like going through the same struggle, you want to help them versus trying to pitch someone on this idea someone who has never fundraised before. They have zero empathy for this process because they've just never done it.
100%. So like, how do you think about like finding a partner like Eric? So I guess like how do you self-identify what are the strength and weakness of yourself and then how do you kind of like find another person that's kind of like can match or like complements your skill set and also like I guess like build trust with them because I feel like starting a fund it's like some people say it's longer than marriage or something but what's the kind of like thought process behind building a firm in general?
I think, like starting a company, finding a co-founder on the spot is really hard, and I would not recommend it if there isn't anybody who comes to mind. I think I think you would know if you have somebody who comes to mind versus, oh, I'm trying to force it. I think a lot of emerging fund managers think it's a good idea to try to partner with someone, and of course, it seems like a good idea because it's a lonely process and no one wants to be fundraising alone.
Mhm.
But I do think it's really hard to kind of force that fit, and this is why you see a lot of VC firms literally explode and people go off and start new funds because the partnership didn't work out. And it's a, unfortunate reality, but I think it says so much about how it is a partnership and you really need to have confidence that you are aligned. I think when it comes to Eric Sheehan and myself, like it was really important for us to not only have complementary skills, but also to be values aligned in what we want to do with Hustle Fund. And as a strong example of values aligned, like, you know, we invest in a lot of first time founders. We invest in founders all across the globe, across demographics, et cetera, and across industries. I think there are also other VCs who would say, "Oh no, I only want to invest in founders who came from MIT or whatever." And so I think it's really important that your values aligned with your partners, and that's this is a value that Eric Sheehan and I strongly believe in, and we wouldn't be able to bring in people into Hustle Fund who did not share that same belief.
Mm. How do you I guess, like, since you guys are doing, like, I know that for Fund 1, at least, like, you guys are doing, like, 25K tracks for, like, a lot of companies. In terms of, like, sourcing funnel, beyond, like, obviously, Hustle Fund is, like, everywhere. Do you feel like a lot of the like, company that you invested in are, like, you have to go out there to source, or would you say it's more towards, like, whoever just apply? I also know that you guys have, like, the accelerating or like sales school process, like what are things that you feel like you've done that actually generate the best deal funnel? Sorry, it's called Redwood School. I remember, but yeah.
Yeah, so we see about 1,000 startups per month, so
Mhm.
12,000 across the year. And in large part, anybody can apply on our website, but I think where we have ended up writing the most checks is in referrals from either our existing founders or other VCs. And so when we write all this content to generate leads, really what we're doing is we're writing all this content to stay top of mind with other people who then refer their founder friends. That's really what's happening. And so even though people are coming to apply, they are referred in by people within our existing ecosystem who read our content. That's pretty much what the funnel is. So, I think it is hard to remember who all the VCs are out there. So the way we stay top of mind is producing all this content either on Twitter or our newsletter. And then when people read it, they remember, oh yeah, I have this friend who is looking for pre-seed funding. So that's our funnel. And then in terms of, how, I think I missed the second part of the question. How do we know we're getting the best people or?
Oh yeah, like which funnel? Yeah, I think like how to build a funnel, how to like, I mean, we already talk about the building funnel a lot just because of like it's social media as well as like you mentioned like other VC network. Maybe we could talk about like, what is like building the relationship with other VC kind of look like. So who would be the people who refer you deals? Since like I feel like pre-seed seed, like at the very beginning stage, you mentioned it's like maybe founder friends, referral founder friends, or like other VC referrals. How do you think about like, who would refer you something? Like what's their motivation on that? Just since like it's kind of competitive sometimes to think about the very early stage.
Actually, I think at pre-seed, there's very little competition. At seed, it's a different ballgame. Pre-seed is a stage where the company has no revenue. So there are very few investors who will invest in a company pre-revenue unless you are a notable person. And so I think the folks I would count in our pre-seed circles are people like Charles from Precursor, Scott and Jenny from Everywhere, Alex from 2048, folks like that. They're at pre-seed. We do a lot together. We co-invest a lot together, in part because we're all writing relatively small checks and founders want to raise $500,000 to $1 million. So it's very collaborative at this stage. And this is also why I think later stage VCs send people to us, because it's too early for them. Like most seed VCs do not want to be investing when there's $0 and half a product built.
Since like I feel like at the very early stage, I've chatted with a lot of founders, and like what if they are just building something with no monetization strategy? So like how do you rank the technical mode versus like the go-to-market mode of like a team at the very early stage?
We don't invest in consumer. So that's a whole separate category on monetization. So if you are building a business where monetization needs to happen from day one, I truly believe you should try to make it happen in day one. I actually don't believe there are not that many technical moats anymore. Most people can spin up products super quickly, especially with AI now being just a lot easier to I have a lot of companies like generating code with AI even. So distribution is becoming even more important before. And you've seen the shift actually since the 90s. Like in the 90s, there was greenfield. You could get people from anywhere, but it was really hard to build things. And you also need a lot of money to build infrastructure, right? Like people had servers in their closets in the early 2000s. And then that has changed over time to the opposite problem of now everybody and their mother is building the same thing globally, like AI for sales. Like that's a very common idea right now.
Yeah,
everybody and their mother is building it, right? So it is not a hard thing to build, but it is a very hard thing to get customers for at scale. So like that's the thing everybody should be thinking about more than anything. Like how do I get going with monetization, get going with customers, get going with retention?
I guess like when you first started the Redwood School, like who were the primary people that kind of like go for this, and how do you think about like this as like a fun add-on strategy? Is that like I have to personally receive a certain like benchmark in my journey at Redwood School, or like how do you think about it as like a sourcing or like validating slash diligencing funnel for Hustle Fund?
Oh, just to be clear around what Redwood School is, Redwood School is a bunch of free workshops either on customer acquisition or fundraising for Hustle Fund portfolio companies. It's free to our portfolio. I would say it's not quite an accelerator. It's just like a series of workshops, but very condensed. And it's really for our founders. It's not for any, I don't know, metrics judgment. I think that having metrics judgment is like very hard to apply at scale across many different companies. Like the right milestones will be different for every company depending on where they are. But I do think it is a good way for a lot of founders to, one, use other people as a sounding board, especially at PreSeed when there are not many people around the table. You can get feedback from other founders within the cohorts as well as from our investment team. And then the second thing is also around getting sort of tips and tricks on best practices. A lot of the investors on our own Hustle Fund team have done a ton of customer acquisition and still do. Like actually, besides running the fund, as I kind of mentioned, we are basically like a holding company to help with this mission around capital, knowledge, and networks. And so the fund that we've been talking about has been all about capital, but we actually earn a fair bit of revenue through other sources in selling our own products. So that, like, we have a lot of experience in scaling our own products, and we pull from a lot of that knowledge for Redwood School as well.
By your own product, do you mean your own startup, or like do you mean like, let's say, I know that House of Fun have like Angel Squad, that's like a product, I guess. How do you think? Also, I know you guys have like the coolest merch, obviously, but how do you think about like the monetization strategy for, as a fund manager too? Just because, a lot of people's like first fund is you're not gonna like take actual salary. So, how do you think about like sustain yourself in the Bay Area while doing the fund and like
Yeah.
being a fund manager?
So from a revenue perspective, excluding management fees, Hustle Fund, I would put at around a Series A or Series B company. So we actually do generate a fair bit of revenue across all of our products. Angel Squad memberships is one of those. We also sell a lot of sponsorships. We sell tickets. Our merch is probably the least performing business line, and it's probably because no one actually runs it. It's just sort of there, but it's a fun sort of thing. We see it more for branding than for revenue.
Totally. Who's on your personal board of advisors? Because I think you're really smart, and then obviously you're like super authentic. Um,
Thank you.
how do you, I guess, yeah, like who do you kind of like learn from for career advice or just like starting your fund and just like running a fund now?
There's no particular person I think who's been a mentor on this part of the journey. I've been very lucky. So at Hustle Fund, because we're a holding company, we have different business leaders for different business lines. So for example, I'm not really involved with Angel Squad, but they are a big part of Hustle Fund. Brian Nichols is the general manager of that. And I've learned so much from him actually about best practices and being an entrepreneur and just watching him scale that. So I think, the leaders that we have in place around us for our different business lines have been very inspirational to me and helping me grow and learn as well. It's basically like a weird sort of mini YPO in one company. I would
I love that. A mini YPO in one company.
Yeah. Like we see Hustle Fund as sort of a series of different business lines that all work together to make startup ecosystems better in capital, knowledge, and network. So we have a lot of complementary points, but like they're run by different entrepreneurs. Like I'm not in the day-to-day on most of these things and have no idea what's going on in most of these things. But I learned so much from, the entrepreneurs running these businesses within Hustle Fund. So that's been fun. And that's sort of meta because it's like we invest in startups and we have startups within Hustle Fund too.
So like does the revenue just go back to management fee, or like how does the revenue all tie together?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So all of our business leaders on these different lines, they are incentivized very much like an entrepreneur would, except they're running their business essentially within this mission and ecosystem. And so they can make a lot of money when they do well. I guess sort of profit sharing back into the company helps Hustle Fund subsidize other business lines that may not be doing as well or may still be a bit early. So that is what has allowed us to spin up other business lines, is through profits of more mature ones. And that's a model that I think works well, given that our holding company has not raised any money.
Mm. Wait, you have to raise money for a holding company?
Well, no, I mean, some people have, like, for example, Latitude is the holding company, I believe. On Deck was a holding company. So they raise money for their actual companies in addition to having funds themselves.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Obviously this is news to me. I didn't understand this part of the business, but okay, wow. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for actually so open to share these things, just because I feel like these things are like the background knowledge that most people probably don't know. Um and I want to be mindful of your time, and I want to wrap up with like a 1 minute fire round for you. So
Okay.
what's your favorite book?
Oh gosh. Well, Lean Startup probably had the biggest impact on me.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Invite to a dinner party?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Um Michelle Obama.
Why is Hustle Fund's logo a hippo?
I just love hippos.
I love that. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh, the late Tony Hsieh.
Where can we find you outside of work?
These days I play a lot of soccer, so probably on a soccer field, either
Amazing.
coaching or playing.
Oh wow. What do you coach? It's like a high
Kids
school?
soccer.
Yeah,
Kid
okay.
Oh, no, like little kids.
Oh, okay. Love that. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming to the show. You're such an icon, and I
Thank
just
you.
love learning from you from the internet and here.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you so much for having me and for all the kind words.
Let me quickly